Today I shall be talking on Aristotle's concept of mimesis in poetics. Aristotle rejects Plato's concept of mimesis. He did not believe in what Plato said about mimesis in various works. If you remember, friends, that in an earlier version of lecture on Plato, I talked of Plato's ideas about poetry. And in connection with that, I dwelt on the concept of mimesis. Now, I shall just try to refresh our memory by referring to Plato once more. And you can look at the board, and there you can see I have mentioned here two works of Plato, the Laws, where Plato says all art is imitation. And we may note that in the Laws, Plato does not have any derogatory idea of mimesis or imitation. He does not speak ill of, badly of mimesis in the Laws. But in the Republic, especially in these two chapters, chapter 3 and chapter 10, Aristotle rejects poetry on the ground that poetry is mimesis, poetry is imitation. In chapter 3, he compares poets with painters. The poet is a painter, and he suggests that a painter can never fully reproduce what he or she is painting. The painted object cannot be equal in value and merit to the object proper, meaning the model, meaning the real life object which the painter has represented on his canvas. Similarly, the poet imitates the phenomenal world, which too is an imitation of the world of the idea, the ideal world. And therefore, what the poet writes or represents is a double lie. Imitation is a lie. Imitation cannot reproduce the original. And in chapter 10, he says that imitation is connected with illusion. So, what imitation projects or presents is nothing but an illusion of truth. He takes up three things together. I have written down: illusion, imitation, idea. So what is the real thing? What is the truth? The truth remains in the idea. And what does poetry do? Poetry imitates the idea. And therefore, what poetry presents is simply an illusion, not the real thing. So this is Plato's idea of imitation. Imitation as a representation, imitation as more or less a copy of the original. Aristotle rejects this idea. And Aristotle says that the poet is a maker. The poet does not copy, but he makes, or rather he recreates. And thereby Aristotle gives a different interpretation of mimesis. In Aristotle's Poetics, we may specially concentrate on two chapters, chapter 1 and chapter 4. Chapter 1 definitely is most important in connection with his analysis of mimesis, but chapter 4 is no less important. And I shall read a few lines from chapter 4, where we will see that Aristotle as if connects imitation with mimicry. But we shall have to go deeper into it, and we shall find that Aristotle shows the difference between imitation and mimicry. Now let me read the lines. Imitation is natural to man from childhood. One of his advantages over the lower animals being this, that he is the most imitative creature in the world and learns at first by imitation. Now please see what I have written on the board, that imitation is a process of learning. So imitation is not a servile copy. So one who imitates learns from the object that he or she is imitating. And whatever he learns or she learns, that is represented in the work of art. So imitation is a process of learning. And what is there in that process of learning? Or what is there in the representation of what the artist has learned? Delight. So both in the process of learning and in the process of representation, the primary thing that exists is delight. And what is that delight? The delight that we get, that we derive from poetry, comes through this process of learning. So, from that we come, the representation of the object is made through a process of execution. So, this very clearly shows that imitation is not a servile copy. Or to use the language of today, imitation is not the Xerox copy of the original. No, it's not that, because execution of that, as I said earlier, a poet is a maker. He makes. The poet imitates the object, but when the poet, or not simply the poet, any artist, he or she may be a painter, a sculptor, a poet, a singer, whatever. When the artist represents this process of representation is the execution, which is, in other words, making. So the poet is a maker, the poet or the artist is a creator, and mimesis is a process of creation. It's the execution. And Aristotle uses this word coloring, which is very important. What does he mean by coloring? So what the artist gets from the original is colored by the consciousness of the artist. And as it is colored by the consciousness or the artistic sensibility of the artist, it no longer remains the original one. It is a different thing. It is a new creation. So that is what imitation is. Imitation is a kind of an organization. The artist, the poet, organizes in his mind, in his or her consciousness, whatever he or she has imitated or learned from the original. And when the representation is given, it is no longer the original one. It is a new one, a new creation. Now, well, I am tempted to quote from an ancient Sanskrit text where poets are compared to Prajapati. In the ancient Indian mythology, Prajapati or Brahma was the original creator. And the shloka says, Abare kabbo sansare kovireko Prajapati. So in the world of poetry, the poet is a Prajapati. The Prajapati is a creator. So poet is a creator. The artist is a creator. And this creation is made through imitation. Why? Because imitation means learning. And also, what is the process? How does the process undergoes the change? Now, coloring. So, whatever object the artist imitates is finally colored by the artist's mind. And as I said, once again I repeat, the finished object, or the object which is represented as a work of art, cannot be like the original object which the artist imitated or copied. Well, once again I remind my students that here, well, we should not take copy in the, well, no sense that it is, well, crude copy. It's not a crude copy. It is something which undergoes a process of change. How does the process of change come? Through the process of creativity. And how does the creativity work? Coloring. Poet is a maker. So, well, that I said earlier also. And now I refer to the first chapter of Aristotle's Poetics. Now where, well, he has pointed out that imitation involves three basic things: mode or medium of imitation, manner of imitation, and object of imitation. If imitation had been a servile copy of the original, then all the imitated versions would have been similar. But that cannot be, because the imitated version depends on these three basic things. The mode of imitation, how I am imitating the original. If there is a tree, I can take my paint and my brush and represent the tree on a canvas. That is a form of imitation. If I am a poet, I shall use my words and represent the tree through my words, through my rhythm, my music. That will again be a different version of the imitation. And thus the original will become different in every version of imitation, varying according to the mode or the medium. So when a poet imitates, or a sculptor imitates, or a painter imitates, well, the same thing, the same object, the imitated versions will be different. And that shows that imitation is a process of making. The poet or the artist is a maker. The manner of imitation, how I am imitating it, what is my angle, or the object of imitation, well, that can have two meanings. Well, the object of imitation meaning the object I am imitating, or the object of imitation may mean the purpose of imitation. So, well, if I go and try to paint the vastness of the Himalayas, so there, that will be a different thing. If I go to paint a smaller object, I think the result will be different. And then again, the object or the purpose of my imitation, why I am imitating, what is there, what is the purpose of the artist, why the artist is imitating a particular thing or representing a particular thing through imitation. So according to mode, manner and object, the imitated version will vary, and that certainly proves that imitation is a process of creation. Imitation is a rational organization. So if I try to paint the Himalayas, can I represent the Himalayas as a very big object? Well, I cannot. Well, I have to paint it within my canvas. So how I am organizing? Well, on that will depend the merit of my work. So, well, I have to organize my material. The artist will have to organize his or her materials. And therefore, well, the artist is imitating, say, the Himalayas, but he has to or she has to organize it. Otherwise, it cannot be represented. Or a big war, a poet wants to describe it. So he or she will have to organize his or her materials. So the poet is a maker. The poet is an organizer. An artist is an organizer. And imitation is rational organization. Now in the beginning, well, if you remember, I was talking of chapter 4. There I talked of mimicry and imitation. In fact, I read from Aristotle. But there is a basic difference between mimicry and imitation. Both mimicry, why does a human being imitate the voice of another person? Why? So, well, the basic difference is there. Mimicry can give only superficial pleasure, but imitation, which is art, can give us artistic or aesthetic pleasure. So that is the difference between mimicry and imitation. Well, imitation makes an image of truth. So what Plato said that imitation is a process which defies truth. Because truth and beauty can only remain in the ideal world, in the idea. But Aristotle says that imitation makes an image of truth. What is that truth? Aesthetic truth. Aristotle rejects Plato's doctrine of idea, that truth remains only in the idea, and whatever we find elsewhere is only an imitation. Even the phenomenal world is an imitation. Plato takes the example of the table, and he suggests that the idea of the table is in the mind of the carpenter. When the carpenter executes it and makes a wooden table that falls short of the idea, and when a painter paints that table, that becomes only a lame imitation of the idea. The perfect table only remains in the idea. So no imitation, that is Plato's doctrine, no imitation can ever represent the truth, because truth remains only in the idea. Aristotle rejects it, because Aristotle says that imitation is a process of creation, and when the artist creates, the artist represents or creates an aesthetic truth, an artistic truth, which is no less important. And there is one critic, M.R. Murphy. Well, he has put this point in a very interesting way, and I read it. He says that to know the essential difference between the real bed and a painted bed is to try to sleep on the paint and the canvas. Now, well, very interesting. Well, what he means is that when the painter represents a table or a bed on the canvas, we all know that this is not a real bed. This is not a real bed and we cannot go there and sleep on it. But we accept it as an artistic representation of bed. And we get the pleasure of art, the delight of art. Now, Aristotle's concept of mimesis is taken up by Bertolt Brecht. Well, he says, and he asks rather, does Aristotle propose an illusionist theory? So, well, the painted bed, does it create an illusion of the real bed? Now, perhaps the point of Bertolt Brecht can be answered through the Indian theory of rasa. Rasa is a kind of feeling or a sentiment which the imitation generates. We know that it is not real, still the rasa is created and we derive a pleasure. When the king Dusmanta is chasing a deer, we know that it is not a king, nor is it a forest, nor is the deer a real one, but a rasa is created, an emotion is created. How is it created? Through the imitation. Whether we read it or we watch the play on the stage, we can feel the rasa. So, one very important Indian critique has pointed out that this creation of rasa is felicitated by imitation. Or in other words, imitation is necessary to remove the obstacle which stands in our way of enjoying, getting delight from the work of art. So imitation has been discussed by Aristotle at length in Poetics. And as I told you in the beginning, that this is a very small book. This Poetics is a very small book. Well, perhaps had Aristotle been alive, he could have revised the lectures and he could have given more explanations. But because of his unfortunate death, he could not do that. So there are many things in the Poetics which may seem to be rather intriguing to us. They need to be interpreted, and critics, thinkers have tried to interpret various ideas of Aristotle in various ways, and we in our lecture try to explain and interpret Aristotle's concept of mimesis. Thank you.